Hello, hello. Testing 1 2 1 2. Is anybody there? Is this thing on? Welcome to another episode of Magicians Only. Are you a magician? Or let me put it this way. Are there people in your life who think that what you do is somewhat magical? Well, there you go. Maybe you're a magician and you just don't know it yet. This and more horrifying news brought to you by Steve Valentine, Magicians Only, and of course, Magic on the Go, who is a sponsor of this show, an encyclopedia of magic in your pocket. It is not just a course, it's a resource. There's everything you need to know to become a magician. Everything from sleight of hand to self-working tricks to how to put acts together, not to mention deep dives on tricks like the egg bag, the magnetized cards, diminishing cards and cards to pocket, and so much more. That's all at Magic on the Go at magiconthego.com. Please check it out and support. Thank you. And now on to today's episode. Just so you know, soon we're going to be opening a Patreon for Magicians Only that's going to have extra episodes, trick descriptions, transcripts, and stuff like that. So I'm very excited. It should be ready in the next week or two. I will let you know, okay? Meanwhile, thank you to everyone who sent lovely messages regarding last week's episode, which was our very special episode number 12 that had to do with pivoting to success and health, mental health, physical health, career, creative health. It really seemed to strike a nerve, and I want to thank everybody for their wonderful comments and a lot of people who related to what we were talking about. So that makes me feel really, really good. And after all, this entire podcast is about making me feel really, really good. Just kidding. Today's episode, we're pivoting over to another Magic on the Go past masters. This one was called How to Be Funny. I'm not going to tell you who the author is. You have to guess that for yourself. Being funny is a very magical thing to me. It is whether you're funny on stage, in person, maybe you're giving a speech, maybe you're doing a TED Talk, maybe you're just at dinner with the kids or on a date and you want to be somewhat amusing. How do you even approach that? Some people have no idea. I still don't. I have no idea why people laugh. I often have to check my fly. But, I don't even know what that means. But I do know one thing for sure, and that is we all want to be funny. We wish we were funny. And humor has such an amazing way of delivering interesting information, powerful information, and somewhat emotional information. So it is a great tool to have. How do you approach comedy? How do you approach being funny? Well, I found an article, and I'm not going to tell you who wrote it. You have to kind of guess that by the end of this episode. That's what the Past Masters is all about. But I want you to listen to this. There's great advice. I might be wrong, but I think this article was written over 100 years ago, which is a massive clue and somewhat interesting that it is entirely relevant today. Here we go. Past Masters.
Past Masters.
There's been a lot of talk over the last few years about character in magic and finding out who you are and being comfortable with that. And then, there's a great masterclass by Steve Martin on comedy in which he talks about finding your authentic self, because once you know who you are, who that extension of your personality is on stage, then the comedy can come from that. Now you know what your point of view is. When you go to see a comedian, when you go to see someone like Chris Rock, or you go to see someone like Steve Martin, you kind of know what you're going to get because you know their point of view, you know their style of comedy, and that's what you have to find as a magician, especially if you want to stand out in the crowd and you want to stand head and shoulders above everybody else who's doing comedy magic. Now, of course, not everybody wants to do comedy, and I'm not saying you have to do comedy. There's a lot of great dramatic magicians and mentalists out there. But even a little bit of humor now and then to break the tension as you're creating your miracles is really something to strive for and is welcome. When you present a show, you want to have the ups and the downs. You want to have this roller coaster ride for your audience, and adding humor and comedy at the right moments is something that's going to help you create that effect. Humor is also a fabulous way to create misdirection. It's a great way to get the audience to relax. It has so much going for it as a technique in magic, not just, hey, I want to be funny, but hey, I want to use this gag, this bit of business, this situation comedy moment as a misdirect for my sleights and my moves and my loads and whatever else it is that you have to do. Or even time misdirection. Time misdirection is something we often need when we're doing a magic trick. You don't want people to remember that you were just over at the table reaching inside the bag where you were secretly loading. You want to come back to that later, and the great way to get people to kind of forget that you were over by your bag is to have some comedy bit going on the other side of the stage. So anyway, the point is, comedy is incredibly important, and it is about understanding people. It's about understanding the world around us, understanding who you are. All of these things will be touched upon in this article. It is a work of genius, and just by me using the word genius should tell you who this is. This was originally published in American Magazine 86, November 1918. It's entitled, What People Laugh At. Comedy moving pictures were an instant success because most of them showed policemen falling down coal holes, slipping into buckets of whitewash, falling off patrol wagons and getting into all sorts of trouble. Here were men representing the dignity of the law, often very pompous themselves, being made ridiculous and undignified. The sight of their misfortunes at once struck the public funny bone twice as hard as if private citizens were going through like experience. Even funnier than the man who's been made ridiculous, however, is the man who, having had something funny happen to him, refuses to admit that anything out of the way has happened and attempts to maintain his dignity. Perhaps the best example is the intoxicated man who, though his tongue and walk give him away, attempts in a dignified manner to convince you that he's quite sober. He is much funnier than the man who, wildly hilarious, is frankly drunk and doesn't care a whoop who knows it. Intoxicated characters on the stage are almost always slightly tipsy, with an attempt at dignity, because theatrical managers have learned that this attempt at dignity is funny. For that reason, all my pictures are built around the idea of getting me into trouble, and so giving me the chance to be desperately serious in my attempt to appear as a normal little gentleman. That's why, no matter how desperate the predicament is, I am always very much in earnest about clutching my cane, straightening my derby hat, and fixing my tie, even though I've just landed on my head. I'm so sure of this point that I also incriminate the other characters in the picture. When I do this, I always aim for economy of means. By that I mean that when one incident can get two big separate laughs, it's much better than two individual incidents. In The Adventurer, I accomplished this by first placing myself on a balcony, eating ice cream with a girl. On the floor directly underneath the balcony, I put a stout, dignified, well-dressed woman at a table. Then, while eating the ice cream, I let a piece drop off my spoon, slip through my baggy trousers, and drop from the balcony onto this woman's neck. The first laugh came at my embarrassment over my own predicament. The second, and the much greater one, came when the ice cream landed on the woman's neck, and she shrieked and started to dance around. Only one incident had been used, but it had got two people into trouble and had also got two big laughs. Simple as this trick seems, there were two real points of human nature involved in it. One was the delight the average person takes in seeing wealth and luxury in trouble. The other was the tendency of the human being to experience within himself the emotions he sees on the stage or screen. One of the things most quickly learned in theatrical work is that people as a whole get satisfaction from seeing the rich get the worst of things. The reason for this, of course, lies in the fact that 9/10 of the people in the world are poor and secretly resent the wealth of the other 10. If I had dropped the ice cream, for example, on a scrub woman's neck instead of getting laughs, sympathy would have been aroused for the woman. Also, because a scrub woman has no dignity to lose, that point would not have been funny. Dropping ice cream down a rich woman's neck, however, is, in the minds of the audience, just giving the rich what they deserve. By saying that human beings experience the same emotions as the people in the incident they witness, I mean that, taking ice cream as an example, when the rich woman shivered, the audience shivered with her. A thing that puts a person in an embarrassing predicament must always be perfectly familiar to an audience, or else the people will miss the point entirely. Knowing that ice cream is cold, the audience shivers. If something were used that the audience did not recognize at once, it would not be able to appreciate the point as well. On this same fact was based the throwing of custard pies in the early pictures. Everyone knew that custard pie is squashy, and so was able to appreciate how the actor felt when one landed on him. Many persons have asked me where I got the idea for the type of character I play. Well, all I can say is that it is a composite picture of many Englishmen I'd seen in London during the year of my life in that city. When the Keystone Film Company, with which I made my first pictures, asked me to leave Carnot's Night in an English Music Hall, a pantomime in which I was playing, I was undecided about what to do about the offer, principally because I did not know what kind of a comedy character I could play. Then, after a time, I thought of all the little Englishmen I'd seen with small black moustaches, tight-fitting clothes, and bamboo canes, and I decided to model my makeup after these men. Thinking of the cane was perhaps the best piece of luck I ever had. One reason is that the cane places me in the minds of the audience more quickly than anything else could. The other is that I have developed the cane until it is almost a comedy sense of its own. Often I find it curling itself around someone's leg or rapping someone on the shoulder and getting a laugh from the audience, almost without my knowing that I was directing its action. Very often I hear a slight ripple at something I'd not expected to be funny. At once I prick up my ears and ask myself why that particular thing got a laugh. In many ways, my going to see a movie is really the same as a merchant observing what people are wearing or buying or doing. Anyone who caters to the public has got to keep his knowledge of what people like fresh and up to date. In the same way that I watch people inside a theater to see when they laugh, I watch them everywhere to get material which they can laugh at. I was passing a firehouse one day, for example, and heard a fire alarm ring. I watched the men sliding down the pole, climbing onto the engine and rushing off to the fire. At once, a train of comic possibilities occurred to me. I saw myself sleeping in bed, oblivious to the clanging of the fire bell. This point would have a universal appeal because everyone likes to sleep. I saw myself sliding down the pole, playing tricks with the fire hoses, rescuing the heroine, falling off the fire engine as it turned a corner, and many other points along the same lines. I stored these points away in my mind, and sometime later, when I made The Fireman, I used every one of them. Yet, if I had not watched The Firehouse that day, the possibilities in the character of a fireman might never have occurred to me. Another time I went up and down a moving staircase in a department store. I got to thinking about how this could be utilized for a picture, and I finally made it the basis of The Champion, in which I, the small man, knocked out a big bruiser by having a horseshoe concealed in my glove. In another picture, I sued an employment office as the foundation of the picture. In other words, it's paid me to be always alive to the comic possibilities of the people and the things I see in everyday life. I was seated in a restaurant once, for example, when I suddenly noticed that a man a few yards away kept bowing and smiling, apparently at me. Thinking he wished to be friendly, I bowed and smiled back at him. As I did this, however, he suddenly scowled at me. I thought I'd been mistaken in his intentions. The next minute, however, he smiled again. I bowed, but once more he scowled. I could not imagine why he was smiling and scowling until, looking over my shoulder, I saw that he'd been flirting with a pretty girl. My mistake made me laugh, and yet it was a natural one on my part. So when the opportunity came a few months ago to utilize such a scene in A Dog's Life, I made use of that incident. Another point about the human being that I use a great deal is the liking of the average person for contrast and surprise in his entertainment. It's a matter of simple knowledge, of course, that the human likes to see the struggle between good and bad, the rich and the poor, the successful and the unsuccessful. He likes to cry and he likes to laugh, all within the space of a very few moments. To the average person, contrast spells interest, and because it does, I'm constantly making use of it in my pictures. If I'm being chased by a policeman, I always make the policeman seem heavy and clumsy, while by crawling through his legs, I appear light and acrobatic. If I am being treated harshly, it's always a big man who's doing it, so that by the contrast between big and little, I get the sympathy of the audience. And always, I try to contrast my seriousness of a manner with the ridiculousness of the incident. It is my luck, of course, that I am short and so able to make these contrasts without much difficulty. Everyone knows the little fellow in trouble always gets the sympathy of the mob. Knowing that is a part of human nature to sympathize with the underdog, I always accentuate my helplessness by drawing my shoulders in, drooping my lip pathetically and looking frightened. It's all part of the art of pantomime, of course. But if I were 3 inches taller, it would be much more difficult to get the sympathy of the audience. I should then look big enough to take care of myself. As it is, the audience, even while laughing at me, is inclined to sympathize with me. As someone once said, it feels like mothering me. However, one has got to be careful to make the contrast clear enough. At the close of A Dog's Life, for example, I am supposed to be a farmer. Accordingly, I thought it might be funny for me to stand in a field, take one seed at a time from my vest pocket, and plant it by digging a hole with my finger. So I told one of my assistants to pick out a farm where this scene could be taken. Well, he picked out a nice farm, but I didn't use it for the simple reason that it was too small. It did not afford sufficient contrast for my absurd way of planting the seed. It might be slightly funny on a small farm, but done on a large one of about 600 acres, the scene was hilarious because of the contrast between my method of planting and the size of the farm. On almost a par with contrast, I would put surprise. Surprise has always seemed interesting to me because it's somewhat like news. Whenever I read the newspaper, I'm always being surprised at what's happened in the world since yesterday. If, however, before I pick up the newspaper, I knew exactly what was going to be in it, I wouldn't be surprised and therefore not so interested. I not only plan for surprise in the general incidents of a picture, but I also try to vary my individual actions so they too will come out as a surprise. I always try to do the unexpected in a novel way. If I think an audience expects me to walk along the street while in a picture, I will suddenly jump on a car. If I want to attract a man's attention, instead of tapping him on the shoulder with my hand or calling to him, I hook my cane around his arm and gently pull him to me. Figuring out what the audience expects and then doing something different is great fun for me. In one of my pictures, The Immigrant, the opening scene showed me leaning far over the side of a ship. Only my back could be seen, and from the convulsive shudders of my shoulders, it looks like I was being seasick. If I had been, it would have been a terrible mistake to show it in the picture. What I was doing was deliberately misleading the audience, because when I straightened up, I pulled a fish on the end of a line into view, and the audience saw that instead of being seasick, I had been leaning over the side to catch the fish. It came as a total surprise and got a roar of laughter. There is such a thing, however, as too funny. There are some plays and pictures at which the audience laughs so much and so heartily that it becomes exhausted and tired. To make an audience roar is the ambition of many actors, but I prefer to spread the laughs out. It's much better when there's a continual ripple of amusement with 1 or 2 big stomach laughs than when an audience explodes every minute or two. People often ask me if all my ideas work out and if it's easy to make a funny picture. I sometimes wish they would follow the whole process of getting the idea, working out the characters, taking the film, editing and arranging it. I'm often appalled at the amount of film I have to make in getting a single picture. I've taken as much as 60,000 feet in order to get the 2,000 feet seen by the public. It would take about 20 hours to run off 60,000 feet seen by the public. It would take about 20 hours to run off 60,000 feet on the screen. Yet that amount must be taken to present 40 minutes of picture. Sometimes when I find that, though I've worked hard over an idea, it has not yet taken final shape in my head and is therefore not ready to be filmed, I at once dropped it and tried something else. I do not believe in wasting too much time on something that will not work out. I do believe in concentrating all your energies upon the thing that you are doing. But if you can't put it across after having done your best, try something else for a time, and then come back to your original scheme if you still have faith in it. That's the way I've always worked. In my work, I don't trust anyone's sense of humor but my own. There have been times when people around the studio have screamed at certain scenes while the picture was in the making. And yet I've discarded those scenes because they didn't strike me as being funny enough. It isn't because I think I'm so much smarter than those around me. It's simply because I'm the one who gets all the blame or credit for the picture. I can't insert a title in a picture, for instance, and say, "People, I don't blame you for not laughing. I didn't think this was funny myself, but the fellows around me told me it was, and so I let it go." Here's another point that makes it difficult for me to trust the judgment of those around me. My cameraman and other assistants are so used to me that they don't laugh very much at what I do in rehearsal. If I make a mistake, however, then they laugh. And I, not realizing perhaps that I've made a mistake, am likely to think the scene is funny. I didn't get onto this point until I asked some of them one day why they laughed at a bit of business that I didn't think was amusing. When they told me they'd laughed because I'd done something wrong, I saw how they might mislead me. So now I'm glad that they don't always laugh at my stuff. One of the things I have to be most careful about is not to overdo a thing or to stress too much of any particular point. I could kill laughs more quickly by overdoing something than by any other method. If I made too much of my peculiar walk, if I were too rough in turning people upside down, if I went to excess in anything at all, it will be bad for the picture. Restraint is a great word, not only for actors, but also for everybody to remember. Restraint of tempers, appetites, desires, bad habits, and so on is a mighty good thing to cultivate. One of the reasons I hated the early comedies in which I played was because there wouldn't be much restraint in hurling custard pies. One or two custard pies are funny, perhaps, but when nothing but custard pies is used to get laughs, the picture becomes monotonous. Perhaps I don't always succeed by my methods, but I would 1,000 times rather get a laugh through something clever and original than through slapstick and horseplay. There's no mystery connected with making people laugh. All I have ever done is to keep my eyes open and my brain alert for any facts or incidents that I could use in my business. I've studied human nature, because without knowledge of it, I could not do my work. And, as I said at the very beginning of this article, knowledge of human nature is at the foundation of almost all success. Wasn't that great? Couldn't you just see applying every single thing he talks about when you consider this was written over 100 years ago, 102 years ago? It's really quite astonishing. I made some notes as I was going through it about the things that stood out to me and I want to kind of address in this article. He talks about the pompous getting what they deserve, and this is something that has never changed, right? This is one of the cores, the core principles of comedy is the person who's getting it, who is the victim, who is the one who is being tricked, has to be someone that we universally dislike. You'll notice in movies and TV, they'll make you dislike someone so that when the hero does something bad to that person, you cheer for the hero and you don't feel sympathy for the bad person. So they make the pompous. There's nothing like, and every country does it. And England is really good at knocking people off their pedestal, especially the press. They do that all the time. They build them up and then boom, they knock them off. How do you apply that to a magic show is something you're going to have to figure out. Who's going to be the snobby person? Who's going to be the elite pompous twat, shall we say? Are you going to have an assistant? Is the assistant snobby? And are they rolling? I mean, look at the great Tom Sony, right? You know, Tom Sony has Johnny Thompson had this amazing kind of persona with it sticking his chest out with the medals, and he's just the greatest in the whole world. And then his assistant would just make fun of him and roll her eyes, and that's where that comedy came from. Perhaps I'm just spitballing here, but let's say you go on stage, you say your assistant couldn't make it, but you've asked your mum to come help you. You know, your mum and now you have this older woman who plays your mum, and she comes out and she's just rolling her eyes and she's giving you criticisms and telling you to stand up straight. And, you know, there's a comedy in that. Or you have somebody who acts the role of your assistant who believes it's completely beneath them to be your assistant. And you build up the audience dislike for this person. And then finally, when you, the performer, turn the tables on that person, it's going to be really, really funny. Anyway, have a think. It's not as easy to apply this pompous idea. I think maybe if you look at something like a trick that goes wrong, and I want to discuss this a fair bit, but the magician in trouble trick. If you have done a lot of fantastic magic and you've built up a certain thing in a way that hasn't been overdone, exercise restraint, which he talks about later in the article. You haven't built up, shall we say, the torn and restored paper where people can kind of see the fake expose coming. It will, and you have a long enough pause when those apparent torn pieces, say, fall on the floor accidentally, and you make that moment real, then the recovery will be great and it'll be funny. But a lot of magicians, when they do a magician in trouble, will immediately go, "Oh, what? You think it's in the other hand? No, look, see?" And then it's just like you're being rude to the audience. The difference is that the audience thinks you are in trouble, and they may have sympathy with you, especially if you're a likable character on stage. And then you are able to turn it around and succeed. They're actually going to love you for it, as opposed to hating you because you pretended to make a mistake and you manipulated their emotions and you took advantage of their friendship and you kind of gave them the finger. And you gave them the finger by showing them that you didn't really screw up and you were just taking them down the garden path. If you can understand the difference between those two theories and those two ways of playing a magician in trouble kind of trick, then I think you'll be well on your way to understanding how an audience responds. And by the way, you do realize this was Chaplin, right? Okay, good. There is this thing that he says in the article about the man who, having had something happen to him, refuses to admit that anything's out of the way and attempts to maintain his dignity. And this is what we're talking about with the magician in trouble. You need to maintain your dignity and not accept that everything is crashing down around you, as opposed to grabbing your head and kind of like having a bad trip on stage. And whatever your gag is, it's just you need to try and keep it together. That's what makes it funny. The whole thing with the drunk is absolutely true. I've played drunks in TV and film, and I can tell you that when you go too far, it's just, not only is it not funny, it's not interesting, it's not likable, there's no humanity in watching someone fall drunk all over the place, knocking things over, but there's humanity in watching you try to keep it together. Who knows why you're drunk? Maybe you're drunk because something bad happened to you. Maybe you're drunk because you have been waiting too long for someone to come, and by the time they get there, you're just a little tipsy. But it's okay. You can handle everything. You can take your meeting, and now we know something's going to happen. In magic, you have to apply that idea. It really goes to, again, restraint. If you overdo a joke, if you make it clear that to the audience that wham bam, I just made a joke, it's not going to be funny. Some performers are excellent at throwing away gags and throwing away humor. And I'm not saying you have to throw it away, but what I'm saying is you don't have to hit it on the head with a hammer. If they laugh, they laugh. If they don't, you move on. One of the things I really, really, really hate is when a magician tells a gag and then reprimands the audience for not laughing. A lot of comedians do that. And then you kind of get this, maybe they'll laugh at the reprimand and you think you've got them, but you haven't. You've just told them off and they're going to resent you for it. I love when he was talking about human nature. You know, the idea that the average person really loves seeing people of wealth and luxury in trouble. That's something to think about. How could you apply that? Can you apply that in a story that you tell on stage? Can you apply that in the characters that you bring on stage with you? The tendency of a human being to experience within himself the emotions he sees on stage or screen, this is what it's all about. This is relatability. Your props, you want them to look normal, not necessarily because we want people to think they're ungimmicked or not trick, but because they understand what it is immediately. They know a plastic cup is a plastic cup. They know that liquid is wet, so when it vanishes, it's harder to make it disappear. They know these things. Relatability. We know what a deck of cards is. No one knows what some bizarre cabinet is or how it's built. No one knows that. A perfect example, I think, is John Kennedy, who has this vanishing coffee trick called Mojo. Now, a lot of people have dismissed this because it's way too simple, but it's a way stronger trick than you think. First of all, it's a Starbucks coffee cup, right? It's a cardboard coffee cup with a gimmick in it, so it looks like you have a full cup of coffee right up to the very rim. And then you make that coffee disappear from the cup. Immediately, we know what a Starbucks cup is. We know what coffee looks like. It's swishing around there at the top of the cup. It looks real. We accept it for what it is. And we also know what it means to spill a cup of coffee, to turn it upside down and to make it fall all over the place. We know what that feels like. So presenting a trick like Mojo, to me, is the ultimate exercise in relatability, which is why it's better to take a piece of newspaper, roll it into a cone, and pour out a bunch of silk handkerchiefs than to take a silver tube, open it up, show it, and then pull silk handkerchiefs out. The silver tube is a magician's prop. Paper is paper. By the way, I loved that this comment that he said 102 years ago, that the reason for all of this lies in the fact that 9/10 of the people in the world are poor and secretly resent the wealth of the other 10th. Yeah. Things really haven't changed, have they? It's interesting how when he decided he had to find his character, he eventually settled upon the idea of these little British guys that he'd seen, little tramps that he'd seen in London. I think that this is an extreme example of finding a character on stage. You want to find out who you are. What he needed to do was to create a brand, something that was also pantomime. It was a real character. It was acting. When you're on stage, most of the time you're going to be playing a version of yourself or a character that kind of comes naturally. I remember Jeff Hobson in his talk on comedy, which was brilliant, talking about how he didn't play the gay character thing. He didn't realize until some audience reacted once when they saw him dressed a certain way that they thought he came across as being potentially gay, and then he was able to take that and kind of build his stage persona. I think it's important to ask people how they see you when you perform. What is the impression that you give? I mean, obviously film yourself, watch yourself, but what's the impression you give when you're performing? And you're going to get different responses. If you ask your family, they go, family on the whole, there's familiarity breeds contempt, and they don't see you as a performer most of the time. And there's two ways it's going to go, right? One is they roll their eyes and, oh my God, Steve thinks he's going to be a star, or he thinks he's got talent. Oh God, I've seen these tricks a million times. They're not going to give you a real reaction because their point of view comes from familiarity and complacency and sometimes contempt. Or they're gonna want to support and love you, in which case their point of view comes from supporting you in such a way that it makes you feel that everything you do is right. You have to find someone, you have to find friends, perhaps directors and people in the industry who can sit and watch your show and give you direct, clear, sometimes brutal feedback. Friends can be good, and employees absolutely not. It was interesting that Chaplin was discussing why some of his employees laughed. He realized they weren't laughing at his usual comedy because they were used to him. They were laughing when he screwed up the actual comedy, and so he got to realize that. And I think the same goes for employees. And you've got to remember, employees and family, that they have agendas, right? So an employee doesn't want to get fired. An employee wants to keep his job. An employee is very careful about what they say. They might be kissing your butt when really what you want is genuine, honest feedback. So it's very hard to ask for and to get genuine, honest feedback. Once you find someone or a group of people who will do that and give you that, you hold on to them because that is a treasure. When we're talking about traits, I mean, when you ask people how they see you, are you large? Are you big? Are you a little person? Do you create sympathy? Or when you walk on stage, are you the kind of persona where everyone just shakes their head and expects that you're going to suck? I remember years and years ago, I worked with this guy who was a comedy impressionist, and he was a little kind of weakly, nerdy looking guy, and he just was very nervous when he went out. And I'm telling you, every single show he got a standing ovation. Why? Because when he went out on stage, he was a little tripped up. He tripped up a little bit. He stumbled a little bit on what he said. And the audience immediately assumed that they knew that this guy was going to suck. So they made a decision about him. They judged him. And then about 5 minutes in, he turned on the talent. And oh my God, were they shocked. You see this all the time in America's Got Talent. You see when somebody walks on stage and everyone kind of shakes their head and says, "Oh my God, what have we got here?" And then the singer will open their mouth and it has an even greater impact than just if you had that talent coming out of someone you expected it to come out of, because we have judged that person and now we feel bad about judging that person. And now this person has given us what we rarely find nowadays, which is a surprise, a shock, a feeling, yes, a feeling of guilt, but a feeling of joy, and now a feeling of compassion for this person on stage. So ask people around, how do they see you? Are you imposing? Are you nerdy? Are you clumsy, shy? Find those traits and figure out how you can use them in your show. Record every show, right? Make sure that they're laughing at the jokes, but also listen. Did they laugh unexpectedly? Chaplin talks about this. He talks about going and listening to audiences at what they're laughing at, and also the unexpected laughs. The great thing, I learned this actually not so long ago. I was recording a routine called Mama Hates Magic, which is a new repeat vanishing silk story routine. And what was pointed out to me by a friend, which I didn't notice straight off the bat, was I was cutting off the laughs, that there were applause points and there were laugh moments that I was riding over because I wasn't expecting people to react at that moment. And therefore, I wasn't listening to the audience and I wasn't allowing them to react. And what happens when that happens? If you step on laughs all the time consistently, the audience subconsciously will feel that their laughter isn't important to you and they'll shut up. And you don't want an audience to shut up in that way. So watch your tapes, but listen to the audience and see if there are moments that they're reacting to that you didn't think they were going to react to, that you can then pump up a little bit and make more out of, or at least take a pause and allow the audience to show you how much they love what you're doing. Watch other shows, other movies, watch other magic shows. What are people responding to? Don't copy the magician, of course, but see what kind of material people are responding to. The fireman story is very, very cool. If you hadn't watched the fireman jumping onto the fire engine and zooming off down the street, you wouldn't have had the idea for the fireman routine. Maybe this helps you create magic that's relatable. Look at a situation you're in. How could magic make this better? How could magic have improved something? Is there a way to create a routine around that? We all know what it's like to have to bag our groceries. Wouldn't it be great if we can make our groceries jump into the bag in a nanosecond? There's an effect, right? We look in life and real life and see how you can apply your magic and even gags. I mean, my notes app on my iPhone is overflowing with random observations and gags. I have a stand-up list. I'll open it right now. And you can hear, I'll just read, and these are random gags that I put under the heading of stand-up because I feel like this is stuff I can make into a longer routine. You know, my son said the other day, we were talking about California and New York, and my son who's 4 years old, he just went, "Oh, Evie," he was telling my daughter off who's older, "Evie, California is not in New York. New York is in California. Get your facts straight." That's what he said. He's 4. That's a funny bit of humor, that if I'm talking about my son in a piece on stage, I can actually put that in. There's always those 3 words that pop into your mind after good sex. Well, now what? I thought that was funny, as opposed to "I love you." You get the twist and the turn. You know, there's a line about beats. I'm not going to do that one on this podcast. Anyway, I write these ideas down, and then somehow later on, I'm going to... my son called himself half human, half vegetarian the other day. I thought that was hilarious. So there you go. So you take these ideas and you write them down, and maybe somewhere down the road, you'll find a place for them. I think 2 of the most important things that he talked about when it comes to comedy, and it works as well in any show, in any magic show, is contrast and surprise. He holds them to equal weight. Contrast is, for example, one piece you might do might be fast and funny, and then you're going to slow it down and you're going to do an intimate piece in a spotlight. A perfect example of someone who uses contrast is Sammy Davis Jr. If you can watch any of his one-man shows, and they're all on YouTube, the one in Australia specifically is fantastic, you'll see that one of the things he does is he contrasts not just the music, but the energy of each piece. You don't know what's coming next. I find contrast to be a fantastic technique. I will go fast, and then suddenly stop, have a moment of silence, sit on the front of the stage and do something intimate and bring everybody in close. And then boom, you're into something bigger, or boom, you're into the audience. Paul Daniels talks about it in his masterclass DVDs that came out a number of years back. He talks about how to contrast where you are on the stage. Are you at the front? Are you on the back? Are you on the sides? Do you use your stage in a good way? Making sure that you're connecting with your audience in the back, the front. Are you looking all the way to the back? Are you just looking at the front for a moment? Are you focused on one person? Are you bringing everybody in? Contrast. You want to make sure that there's contrast in your show. If it's all the same, it's going to get boring. And that's where surprise, almost the same thing, but surprise comes in. I have a routine where I talk about how I'm going to misdirect the audience, and then there's a loud crash off to the side of the stage, and by the time they look back, the bit has happened. This is a perfect example of surprise, maybe an over-the-top example of surprise, but they didn't see that coming. And come on, guys, as magicians, we have surprise built into everything we do. So when you're doing a trick, is the audience expecting you to restore that newspaper? What other things can you do with those pieces other than restore them, right? Are they expecting you to read their mind? What other things can you do with the knowledge that you've got rather than just blurt out what they're thinking? You know, one of the reasons that I love Booked, even though it is my routine, but one of the reasons I love having that ripped page vanish out of the book and appear anywhere else is I can make that page appear anywhere. I can have it appear on somebody's back, on my back, in a glass, in a coffee cup. I did it on television where I had it appear in an empty coffee cup that was in front of a news reporter. That's surprise. It's funny, in writing scripts, we often are told to ask the character in our mind, what do you want to do next? Where would you go? And I think in magic, we need to ask the audience in our minds, an imaginary audience, and say, what do you think I'm going to do next? And whatever they say, do the opposite, right? Don't go for the obvious, go for the surprise. It's a lot of work, but as Chaplin said, 60,000 feet of film. Where is your 60,000 feet? Have you put in your 60,000 feet on your act? And I do love that he was honest about working on an idea, and if it just doesn't work, even after you've put in a ton of work, if it just isn't quite making it, know when to drop the bit, know when to let go and to move on. It's going to save you so much sanity. Trusting your humor. Chaplin did it. Steve Martin in his book, Born Standing Up, which I highly recommend. If you're going to do any kind of performing, you have to read Steve Martin's book, Born Standing Up, which is also an audio tape. I just finished it and it was amazing. He tells so many stories about how he wanted to do a different kind of humor and no one got it when he started. People were saying, I just don't find him funny. Where's the punchline? That's not how you do comedy. But in the end, that kind of comedy, when it hit, it put him into stadiums where he was performing for 20,000 people. Believe in your humor. Believe, like a musician who believes in their songs. Believe in your magic. Believe in your style. Believe in what makes you unique. Believe in what makes you stand out head and shoulders above everybody else. So what if you're not doing a magic act like everybody else does? That's what makes you special. One more note on restraint, which I thought was such a great technique. I think contrast, surprise, and restraint. I can give you a couple of examples about how restraint works. I was watching the documentary on The Who recently, and there was a clip of them being obnoxious rockers on the Smothers Brothers show, which was a very popular show, I think in the late 60s, a variety show. Tommy Smothers and his was one of the two comedians who hosted the show. He's trying to interview all the members of The Who, and he's getting more and more frustrated because they're being obnoxious musicians, right? And they're just they're being absolutely out of control. And he's keeping it very calm, and you can see there's just a little flicker of frustration as he's trying to get a conversation going with these guys. And then at one moment he goes, guys, cut it out, or something like that. And he yells just that one moment, and it's hilarious because it's built up to that moment, and everyone laughs. Why? Because one, we know that from his character that he can try and be funny up to a certain point. We know that he can very easily get frustrated, but also we're in sympathy for him because we're seeing him really struggle and try to make this work. But also remember, it was maybe, guys, cut it out. It was like 5 words, just 5 words. He didn't have a whole monologue where he was yelling and screaming. He didn't do it 3 or 4 times during the interview. He knew the one moment to lose his cool for a second, and that was hilarious. Years ago, I did a commercial with Jason Kidd, the basketball player, and I remember it was a Magic commercial, and I produced a basketball from nowhere, and then I threw it to him, and then he had to do the whole thing in my face. He is famous for being able to hold a basketball in one hand and fake out like he's throwing it. And the director wanted a reaction from me that was so restrained, just one of those, this is crazy. It was just kind of that was weird kind of reaction in my eyes. Not a head turn, not a sneer, not a big facial expression. It was really it took, I'm embarrassed to say, at least half an hour to get that one, just kind of that little look from the eye. It was a little look to the right as if to say, what just happened? That was crazy. That was the hardest thing I've ever done. And when it was too big, I saw it on the monitor. It didn't work. When it was that little subtle moment, that little look, it was funny. Restraint is everything. So be aware of human nature. Be aware of the world around you. The greatest criticism most magicians get is that you can watch their show and you will have no idea what decade you're in. There's nothing in the show that says you're in 2020. There's nothing in the show that says you're aware of the world around you. Make it relatable, make it modern, and make it you. And a huge thank you to Charlie Chaplin for everything he did for comedy and for film, and for taking the time to write that article in the November 1918 issue of American Magazine 86. That's it.
Past Masters.
Well, that's it for another episode of Magicians Only. Thank you so much for spending time with us. If you've made it through to the end of this episode, oh my God, congratulations. What's wrong with you? Get a life. Just kidding. Really happy that you're still here. As you know, Magicians Only is brought to you by the incredible Magic on the Go, an encyclopedia of magic in your pocket. While the rest of the world is giving you courses, Magic on the Go gives you resources. And that's what you need to be a magician in today's day and age. So check that out at magiconthego.com. Keep a lookout for the Patreon coming very soon for Magicians Only. Thank you for all the love and support, and I'm sending all my love and support back to you. I'll see you on the inside for next week's episode. Ciao for now.